There is a version of you that is completely unstoppable. Not the version that shows up when you feel motivated, not the version that appears when everything is going well. The version that exists when you want something so badly that stopping is simply no longer an option. Most people never meet that version of themselves, not because it doesn't exist, but because they never gave it a reason to show up. And here's what I have seen in the lives of people who built something extraordinary from nothing, in the lives of people who had every reason to quit and didn't, in the lives of people who became someone nobody expected them to become. That version of themselves did not appear because of talent. It did not appear because the environment was right, or the opportunities were perfect, or the circumstances finally aligned in their favor. It appeared because of one thing and one thing only: the intensity with which they decided to pursue what they wanted. I have seen people with every advantage imaginable: intelligence, education, money, support, who never built anything that lasted because they approached their goals with the kind of casual interest that fades the moment things get difficult. And I have seen people with none of those advantages, people who started with nothing, who faced resistance at every turn, who had every reasonable excuse to quit and didn't because somewhere along the way something shifted inside them, and the goal stopped being something they wanted and became something they needed. That shift, that moment when a desire becomes a necessity, when a goal becomes an obsession, is the moment everything changes. Not the strategy, not the plan, not the circumstances. The intensity. James Allen understood this and wrote that the strength of effort is the measure of the result. And what he meant was not just physical effort, but the concentrated force of a mind that has decided completely and without reservation that it is not going back. That is what this video is about. Not motivation, not the kind of feeling that lasts for an afternoon and disappears by morning. This is about how to take whatever goal you are carrying right now, the one that matters, the one that you know could change everything if you actually pursued it with everything you have, and turn it into the kind of obsession that makes excuses impossible, that makes obstacles irrelevant, that makes the question not if you will get there, but simply when. Because when a goal becomes an obsession, the mind stops accepting reasons to stop and starts finding reasons to continue. And a mind that will not stop cannot be stopped. Let me show you exactly how that happens. The first thing you need to understand is something that most people never examine honestly about themselves. Most people do not fail because they lack goals. They fail because their goals are weak. Not weak in the sense of being too small, not weak in the sense of being unrealistic, but weak in the most important sense. They have no emotional weight. They are intentions without urgency, desires without necessity, ideas that sound good when everything is going well, but dissolve the moment something pushes back. Think about the goals most people set. I want to be successful. I want to earn more money. I want to get in better shape. I want to build something meaningful. Those sentences are not goals. They are wishes. And wishes do not survive contact with resistance, with difficulty, with the long stretches of invisible work that every meaningful achievement requires before anything visible appears. James Allen wrote that a man sooner or later discovers that he is the master gardener of his soul, the director of his life. And what he understood was that the garden does not tend itself, the direction does not maintain itself, and the goal does not pursue itself. You have to feed it. And most people are trying to feed their goals with the weakest possible fuel, the vague hope that things will work out, the occasional burst of motivation that appears and disappears without warning, the passive wish for a different outcome that never translates into the sustained action that a different outcome requires. A weak goal bends at the first obstacle. A strong goal, one that has been connected to something deep, something real, something that matters to you at a level below logic and strategy and planning. That goal does not bend. It finds a way around the obstacle or through it, or if necessary, it waits, but it does not stop. The difference is not in the goal itself. It is in what the goal is connected to. James Allen understood that the mind acts with force only when something genuinely matters, that the brain does not mobilize its full resources for outcomes it does not care deeply about, and that the key to transforming a passive wish into an active obsession is connecting the goal to something vital. Your dignity, your freedom, your family, your sense of what you are capable of, your refusal to reach the end of your life having lived below your potential. When a goal is attached to something at that level, it stops being an item on a list and becomes a force. Think about a person who says they want to get healthy. That is a weak goal. Now think about a person who watched a parent die early from something preventable, who sat in that hospital room and made a decision that they would not put their children through the same thing, who connected the goal of their health not to an aesthetic preference, but to the people they love and the life they intend to live. That is an obsession. Same goal, completely different fuel. And that fuel is what determines whether the goal survives the first difficult week, the first month of no visible progress, the first year of consistent work with no guarantee of outcome. There was a man named Daniel. He had written down his goals every January for 11 years. The same goals, more or less, every year with the same enthusiasm and the same result. By March, the notebook was in a drawer, and the goals were somewhere between memory and intention, real enough to feel guilty about, but not real enough to act on. One year, something happened that changed the quality of his commitment in a way that no goal-setting exercise had ever managed. His youngest son, who was 7 years old, asked him one evening what he was going to be when he grew up. Daniel laughed and said he was already grown up. And his son looked at him and said, "But you haven't done the thing yet." He didn't know exactly what the thing was. He was 7, but Daniel knew. He had always known. And something about hearing it said out loud by someone who didn't know enough to be polite about the gap between who Daniel was and who Daniel was capable of being broke through something that 11 years of goal setting had not. He didn't write the goal down differently that year. He connected it to something different, not to an outcome he wanted, but to the person his son was watching him become. And that connection changed everything. Not because the strategy changed, not because the circumstances changed, not because he suddenly had more time or more resources or more support, but because the goal finally had enough weight to survive difficulty. And it did. James Allen wrote that the vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, this you will build your life by. And what Daniel discovered was that the vision only becomes powerful enough to build by when it is enthroned in something that matters more than comfort. So let me ask you something directly. What is your goal connected to? Not the version you write down, the version that actually drives you, the version that exists in the quiet, honest part of you that knows the difference between what you want and what you need. Because if your goal is not connected to something at that level, it will not survive what achievement requires. But if it is, nothing will stop it. Now let's talk about the second thing that separates the people who achieve something real from the people who stay where they are despite genuine effort. Focus. Not the kind of focus you have for an hour before something interrupts it. Not the kind that gets applied to 7 things simultaneously and therefore transforms none of them. The kind of focus that closes doors. The kind that chooses one direction and becomes so completely invested in it that everything else, however interesting, however promising, however good it looks, becomes irrelevant because it is not the thing. James Allen wrote that every achievement is the child of sustained effort directed toward a single aim. And what he understood was that the mind, for all its extraordinary capacity, cannot produce mastery in multiple directions at the same time. It can produce activity in multiple directions. It can produce progress in multiple directions. But mastery, the level of result that cannot be ignored, the level of achievement that separates the ordinary from the extraordinary, that only comes from the kind of sustained, concentrated, uninterrupted investment of attention that most people are unwilling to give because the world around them is designed to prevent it. Think about the difference between a flashlight and a laser. Both produce light, both run on energy, both are pointed in a direction. But the flashlight spreads its light across a wide area and illuminates everything at a low intensity, while the laser concentrates its energy into a single point with such precision and force that it can cut through steel. Most people live their professional and creative lives like flashlights. They illuminate many things at a moderate intensity. They make progress in several directions simultaneously. They're busy, genuinely busy, often exhausted by the volume of what they're doing. But they never cut through anything, because cutting through requires concentration, not breadth. It requires the willingness to say no to many good things so that one essential thing can receive the full force of everything you have. James Allen understood this as a law, not a preference, when he wrote that the will to do springs from the knowledge that we can do, but also that the will is strengthened by concentration and weakened by dispersion. Every time you divide your attention, you weaken the force you can apply to any single thing. Every time you add a new project before the current one has been completed, you reduce the depth of your engagement with everything. Every time you say yes to something that is not your primary direction, you're taking resources from the thing that matters most and distributing them across things that matter less. And the result, accumulated over months and years, is a life full of activity and frustratingly short on transformation. There was a woman named Catherine. She was genuinely talented across multiple areas. She could write, she could design, she could teach, she could build systems that other people couldn't see. And for years, she applied all of those talents in as many directions as she could find, believing that the breadth of her effort was an asset. It was not. It was a disguise, a way of staying busy without committing deeply enough to anything to find out whether she was really capable of the thing she most wanted to build. One afternoon, after a conversation that was uncomfortable in exactly the right way, a mentor said to her, "Catherine, you are using your talent to avoid your potential." She sat with that for 3 days, and then she made a decision that felt almost violent in its simplicity. She identified the one thing, the single direction that if she gave it everything, would produce the result that actually mattered to her. And she closed every other door, not temporarily, not with the intention of returning to them later, but genuinely, completely, with the full understanding that every door she closed was a resource she was returning to the one that remained open. The first few months were genuinely difficult. The pull of the thing she had set aside was constant. The fear of missing something real was loud. And there were days where the discipline required to stay in one direction felt almost impossible to sustain. But she stayed. And what happened over the following year was not magic. It was the entirely predictable result of concentrated effort applied over enough time to produce something that could not be ignored. The work got deeper, the results got more substantial, and the momentum that had been dispersed across many directions began to accumulate into something real. James Allen wrote that the oak sleeps in the acorn, and what Catherine discovered was that the oak had always been there, in the single direction she had been too distracted to invest in fully. The acorn just needed someone willing to stop planting in a dozen places at once and tend to one thing long enough for it to grow. So let me ask you directly, where's your attention currently divided? How many directions are you pursuing simultaneously, each of them receiving a portion of what you could be giving fully to one? And what would happen, what would actually become possible if you closed every door but one and gave that one everything? Because the answer to that question is not theoretical. It is waiting for you to find out. The third thing I want you to understand is the one that most conversations about achievement leave out entirely. The obsession has to be pointed at the right thing, because an obsession in the wrong direction is not a path to greatness. It is a path to a very intense version of the wrong destination. And James Allen was clear about this in a way that most people who study his work miss. He understood that the mind directed toward a goal purely from ego, from the need to prove something, from the hunger for recognition or validation, or the defeat of someone who doubted you, that mind will reach a point where the fuel runs out. Because ego is not an infinite resource. It peaks when the recognition arrives, when the validation comes, when the person who doubted you is finally forced to acknowledge what you built. And after that peak, if there's nothing deeper underneath it, the obsession collapses. The people who sustain extraordinary effort over the long arc of a life, over decades rather than years, over the full distance of what something truly significant requires, are almost never the ones who are motivated primarily by recognition. They're the ones who are motivated by something James Allen described as the highest vision of the soul, a contribution, a creation, a purpose that extends beyond themselves and connects to something they consider worth their life's work. When your obsession is connected to that, the fuel does not run out, because you're not drawing from the limited reservoir of personal ambition. You're drawing from something that replenishes itself, the sense of meaning that comes from building something you believe genuinely matters. James Allen wrote that he who cherishes a beautiful vision, a lofty ideal in his heart, will one day realize it. And the key word there is cherish. Not pursue with gritted teeth, not chase with desperate urgency, but cherish with the kind of genuine love for the work and the purpose behind it that sustains effort through everything difficulty can produce. Think about the difference between two people building the same thing. The first person is building it to prove something, to reach a level of success that will finally silence the doubt, to achieve a recognition that will confirm what they always needed to believe about themselves. The second person is building it because they genuinely believe it matters, because the problem they're solving is real, because the people they are serving need what they are creating, because the work itself has meaning beyond what it produces for them personally. The first person will work hard, possibly very hard, and may achieve significant things. But there will come a point, almost always, where the cost exceeds the recognition, where the difficulty outweighs the validation, where the question of whether it is worth it becomes genuinely difficult to answer. And at that point, if there is nothing deeper underneath the ambition, the answer sometimes becomes no. The second person has a different answer available to them at that point, because the question of whether it is worth it is not answered by the recognition, it is answered by the purpose. And purpose, unlike ego, does not get depleted by difficulty. It gets stronger. There was a young man who approached someone he admired after a talk and said, "I want to change my life, but I don't know where to start." The answer he received was simple. Start by finding something that matters to you enough that you would be willing to give everything for it. Not something you want, something you believe in. Not a goal that will make you successful. A purpose that will make the success worth having. He went home that night and sat with that for a long time. And slowly, through the kind of honest self-examination that most people avoid because the answers are uncomfortable, he found it. Not the thing he had been pursuing because it seemed impressive, but the thing he had always known mattered, the thing he had been too cautious to commit to because the commitment it required felt too total. A year later, his life looked completely different. Not because the path had been easy, it hadn't, but because every difficult moment on that path had been answered by the same thing. The knowledge that what he was building mattered, and that knowledge, held consistently with the kind of genuine conviction that James Allen spent his life writing about, was enough. It was always enough. So here's the question I want you to sit with honestly. Is your obsession connected to something you believe in or something you want to be seen achieving? Because the answer to that question will determine how far the obsession carries you. And the obsession that carries you the furthest is always the one that is pointed at something worth more than you. Now let's talk about the thing that makes everything else real. Because everything we have covered so far, the weight of the goal, the concentration of the focus, the alignment of the obsession with a purpose that matters, all of it exists only in potential until one thing happens. Action. Consistent, sustained, repeated, unglamorous, invisible action. The kind that happens not when you feel inspired, not when the conditions are perfect, not when everything is aligned in your favor, but every day because you have decided that the daily action is not optional. James Allen wrote that achievement of any kind is the crown of effort, the diadem of thought. And what he meant was that the thought, however clear, however inspired, however precisely connected to purpose, does not become achievement without effort. The vision does not build itself. The obsession does not produce results by existing. Only action produces results, and only consistent action produces the kind of results that change a life. Most people understand this in theory. Most people would agree, if you ask them, that consistent daily action is the mechanism through which goals become reality. But most people do not act consistently, not because they are lazy, not because they don't care, but because they have not yet made the decision that James Allen was pointing at when he wrote about the will to do. The decision that the action is not contingent on feeling motivated, not contingent on being inspired, not contingent on the conditions being favorable or the resistance being low or the path being clear. The decision that the action happens regardless. Because here's what most people discover only after years of starting and stopping, of being motivated and losing momentum, of committing and retreating and committing again. The motivation does not come before the action. It comes because of it. The feeling of momentum, the confidence that grows from consistent effort, the clarity that emerges from sustained engagement with something you're building, none of those things are conditions that need to exist before you begin. They are outcomes that the beginning produces. And the person who waits to feel ready before they act will wait their entire life. Because ready is not a feeling that arrives before you begin. It is a feeling that begins creates. Think about what it would mean to treat your goal the way a professional athlete treats their training. Not as something they do when they feel like it, not as something they pursue when the conditions are ideal, not as something they engage with when inspiration strikes and set aside when it doesn't, but as a commitment made in advance, honored regardless of how they feel on any given day, because the decision was made once and does not need to be remade every morning. That is the difference between the person who builds something and the person who intends to. Not talent, not opportunity, not circumstance. The decision that the action is not conditional. James Allen wrote that men do not attract what they want. They attract what they are. And what you are is demonstrated not by your intentions, but by what you do when nobody is watching, when there is no immediate reward, when the progress is invisible and the difficulty is real, and the easiest thing in the world would be to take today off and start again tomorrow. What you do in those moments is who you are, and who you are is what determines what you build. There was a man named William. He had spent years telling himself that he was going to build something, years of planning and researching and preparing and waiting for the moment when everything was aligned enough to justify beginning. One day, he had a conversation that changed the quality of his understanding about what he had been doing. A mentor told him simply, "You have been using preparation as a substitute for commitment." He didn't argue because he knew it was true. He had been preparing, genuinely preparing, learning real things and developing real skills, but he had been using that preparation as a reason not to begin, as a way of staying in the safe territory of someone who is getting ready without ever having to find out what actually happened when they started. So he started, not with everything in place, not with every question answered, not with the certainty he had been waiting for. He started with what he had, where he was, and he made one commitment that he honored every single day regardless of what else was happening. 1 hour, every morning before the world made its demands, worked on the thing. Not 2 hours when he felt inspired and 0 when he didn't. 1 hour, every day, without exception. And what happened over the following months was not dramatic. There was no single moment of breakthrough, no sudden shift from struggle to success. There was just the slow, invisible, completely unglamorous accumulation of daily effort that eventually crossed a threshold and produced something real. Something that would never have existed if he had kept waiting to feel ready. James Allen wrote that the will to do springs from the knowledge that we can do. But what William discovered was that the knowledge that you can do something comes from doing it, not from preparing to do it. And the only way to find out what you are capable of is to begin and then to refuse to stop. So here is the challenge I want to leave you with. Not an invitation, a challenge. What is the goal that you know matters? The one that has been sitting in the back of your mind, sometimes for years, waiting for you to take it seriously. The one that, if you're honest, you have been treating as something you will pursue someday when the conditions are better, when you feel more ready, when life gives you permission to finally begin. I want you to identify that goal, and I want you to connect it to something deep enough to fuel it through what it requires. Not to your ambition, not to what success will look like from the outside, but to the purpose underneath it, to the thing you believe matters, to the person you know you are capable of becoming if you stop treating the goal as optional. And then I want you to make one commitment, one daily action, specific, concrete, non-negotiable, that you will take every single day, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what else is happening, regardless of whether the progress is visible or the results are evident or anyone is watching. One commitment, honored daily, without exception, because James Allen understood something that most people spend their entire lives learning the hard way. The mind that decides completely, that commits without reservation, that acts with the consistency of someone who has removed the option of stopping, that mind does not fail. It cannot fail, because failure requires the possibility of stopping, and the obsessed mind does not stop. It adjusts, it learns, it changes direction when direction needs to change, but it does not stop. And a mind that will not stop, applied with consistency and purpose and the full force of everything it has towards something that genuinely matters, will eventually produce something that cannot be ignored. That is not motivation. That is the law James Allen spent his life writing about. The law that the outer world is shaped by the inner one. That what you consistently think and consistently do is what you consistently become. And that there is no ceiling on what that becoming can reach if you are willing to take it seriously enough. So take it seriously. Starting today, not when you feel inspired, not when the conditions improve, not when someone gives you permission. Today, because the version of you that you are capable of becoming is not waiting for a better moment. It is waiting for you to decide that this one is enough. If this video moved something in you, if something you heard today made you stop and think, like the video, share with someone who needs to hear this and subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to explore together. See you in the next one.